All right. Thank you, everyone, for joining us for FCI Live. This is an ongoing free webinar series from Food Co-op Initiative. We do this kind of, what do you want to call this, late fall or late winter, early spring? I don't know anymore. And we do this also in the early fall. We do it twice a year, and it's a free series, 2 weeks. We have speakers who are from peer co-ops talking about their experience. We also have a lot of experts who come and donate their time, and the topics are much more of the moment and casual. A lot of the topics for this session came from things you guys told me you wanted to hear about. So even if you're thinking throughout this session, oh, we should do a session on blank, throw that in the chat. I want to know, because we literally create this based on what you guys tell us and what you need. So today, though, this is a topic that we hear a lot of questions about from co-ops that are in stage 2B and stage 3. And it's a critical topic that even folks in stage 2A development through the development model of Start Food Co-ops should really be paying attention to. And that is the transition from being a working board to a governing board, or from being a board with maybe an employee but not a GM to a board that delegates to a general manager. It's a huge transition. It's really important, and it's actually the place we've seen over the last 5 years some really critical breakdowns and some co-ops that have opened. So really excited to have Joel Kopischke here from 7 Roots today, who not only has been doing co-op governance for a very long time. I won't out him how long unless he wants to do that. But he also has actually been part of coaching and been a part of helping with governance support for several startups through that transition. So he knows what he's talking about. And I am going to hand it over to Joel.
Thank you so much, JQ. Thanks for inviting me and inviting us here at 7 Roots. I did not come alone. I brought help. Heather, you want to introduce yourself and talk about 7 Roots a little bit quickly?
Sure. Yeah. Thank you. Hello, everybody. My name is Heather Lazikis, and I am Joel's coworker over here at 7 Roots. We are a worker co-op, and we provide support for co-ops, and we do that through store design, site feasibility, marketing and branding, interior design, prepared foods, and governance and leadership support. So I am delighted to be here to kind of help sidekick for Joel today, and I'll be sort of helping to be the helm at the chat. And so I'm going to hand it back over to him, and thanks for being here.
Great. Thanks, Heather. Speaking of the chat, you can go ahead, as some of you already have, and check in the chat who you are, where you're from, any sort of fun stuff like that. Yeah, the story I tell is once upon a time, I accidentally got elected to the board of directors at my local food co-op. It was a large co-op, Outpost Natural Foods here in Milwaukee. And I didn't know what I was doing, ended up on the board and loved it, and got some really good help and got good at it, and then started helping other folks. So I've done a lot of governance support and facilitation. I even studied with John Carver on policy governance. I worked with Friendly City Food Co-op, East Aurora Food Co-op, as far as some startups. I've taught foundational governance, presented on governance topics at CCMA and Up and Coming. I was lucky enough to do that with JQ once or twice. Anyway, so that's me, but that's probably more than enough. Let's dig into this. The board transition, working to governance. Let me get my screen share working here. My computer's being a little slow, but hopefully this will all work. Okay. All righty, there we go. So our outcomes for today are to better understand the changing role of the board, working versus governance, probably toss those terms around, as well as better understanding the board and GM roles and relationship, and how to make a plan for board transition. So why are these outcomes important? Knowledge is power. With greater understanding, you'll have a better sense of what is likely to happen, so you can be prepared. You'll have a roadmap, because it's a seismic change when you hire your GM, and change is hard. Making it a smooth transition is even harder. So our plan for today, we've got a lot we want to cover. So I am going to try to keep it brisk and keep it moving. Quick review: board governance, policy governance. So we have that framework to think about this transition and be sure we're all thinking the same thing in terms of what does that mean. We'll talk about what's working versus governance, and then we'll dig into talk about the transition and the transition plan. And then we'll hopefully have time for Q&A at the end. Along the way, if you have questions, put them in chat. I might answer them in the moment, or we might save them for later. Alrighty, so what's the board? Let's quickly review general board stuff. There's tons of resources out there that dive more into the various aspects of startup cooperative governance. We can't cover all of that, and you can't cover all of it in an hour, much less getting to the transition stuff. So what is the board? It's a board of directors is a body of elected or appointed members who jointly oversee the activities of a company or organization. You are trustees, you are stewards, you are fiduciaries. Now, there's different types of boards. Some boards are advisory in nature, some focus on fundraising, some are working, some are governance. We'll dig more into that later, of course. These are defined by your bylaws and your articles of incorporation, and they include legal duties, duty of loyalty, duty of care, duty of obedience, stuff like that. What it boils down to is boards must act in the best interest of the organization and the stakeholders. So what are the jobs of the board? Here's a chance for everybody to weigh in. What do you think the jobs of the board are? You can go ahead and put it in chat.
Don't be shy.
Don't be shy.
Popcorn this thing, throw it in there.
What does the board do? What is the board's jobs? Anybody? Hire GM, leadership, lead, represent the owners. All right, now we got the flow going.
Keep it coming.
Yes, yes, yes.
Guiding the organizational growth.
Yes.
Providing direction to the GM and reporting to owners. Writing policies. Creating pathways for member owner input. Financial interests of the ownership. Communication with the community. Good ones. Communicate. Laying the foundation for the co-op, right? So at all different stages, these things look different. This is great.
All righty. Any more? That's a good list. It's a great list.
Solid.
So we'll see where these fit as we go along, but let's talk about governance now. What does it mean? Well, governance actually comes from the Greek word to steer. So governance means steering the organization towards success. So we're overseeing, we're steering. Good governance answers key questions like, why do we exist? Who do we serve? What positive impact do we have on our community? And how do we make that impact happen? We define roles and responsibilities. Who does what? We establish processes. How do we make good decisions? Things like that. We set expectations and ensure accountability. And everything you said above is governance because it's all your responsibility. So when do we start governing? Well, there's two ways to look at that. One, when you incorporate, because then you have a legal duty to govern. And two, when you have a few more owners than are in your core decision-making group. Now you're making decisions on their behalf, so technically you are governing. So, little sidebar, policy governance, that's another topic that you could spend hours and hours on. So at its core, policy governance is writing down expectations. And that means our agreements. You can call them agreements if you want, or you can call them policies. But if you write them down, that's the key point. And then we delegate authority. So the board starts with all of the authority. And then we decide, oh, we can't do everything all the time. Even very early on in the co-op, very early on, even stage one, there are times where it's like, oh, you know what? We need other folks to handle some of this work. So either delegate it to individual people or to committees. And eventually you're going to delegate a big chunk of it to your general manager. And then you ensure accountability. Once you delegate, you make sure that stuff that you said this is your responsibility, you make sure that stuff gets done and gets done in a good way.
Hey, Joel.
Yes.
About policy governance. So I'm wondering, should we note that policy governance, if you may or may not be familiar, it is the name of the governance system, so to speak, that a lot of co-ops take on.
Yeah, the majority. I don't know exact numbers. I've heard 90%, but it is, yeah, it's a form of governance. Some people, I've heard some complaints about it, and some people say, well, it's counterintuitive and it's hard to learn. And my response to that is, well, that's governance. Governance can be counterintuitive, and to know all about governance takes some effort, takes some work. It's like, it'd be great if I could just sit down in the cockpit of a plane and fly it, but that's not the way it works. So, but we are here to govern our cooperative. So let's do a quick check-in on that. Just a reminder, cooperative is an autonomous association of persons united voluntarily to meet their common economic, social, and cultural needs and aspirations through a jointly owned and democratically controlled enterprise. So I like to think of co-ops as associations and enterprises. So how can we make sense of the work of the board steering both an association and an enterprise or a business, if we want to use that word instead? Well, the way I like to do it is I can build a model or two or more. I always like to use the quote of George Box. He famously said, all models are wrong, but some models are useful. So one model for thinking about boards we mentioned earlier. What type of board are you? Are you advisory, fundraising, working, governance? So that you can think of that as a model. Another model, the subset of those that we're talking about today, is working versus governance. So let's look at that one for a second here. So with a working board, under our enterprise and association, we've got business development for the enterprise, which includes, laying the financial groundwork, working on, your site, choosing a site, or if you have one already, determining, how feasible it is, how we're going to develop it. On the other side, we've got the association of people. We can also think of that as community and capacity, where the board is doing community outreach, it's growing the ownership, and it's doing all that governance stuff. So here's the spoiler. If you're a working board, you're also a governance board. You're always doing governance. So really the better term would be working versus governance only. Although even that's a misnomer, because a governance only board is doing some of the work of the organization. So they're good identifiers to say, oh, this is the model. With a working board, we're doing more of the stuff. With a governance board, we are doing more delegating. So hopefully that makes some sort of sense when we pull that out. So let's see if a picture is worth 1,000 words here, huh? This is, here we go. This is the big board transition and how we think about it. I'm not sure if you can see my cursor, but up here we've got, all right, so we've got our working board, what we're calling a working board. And here's our board, and here's the categories we talked about: the business development and the community and capacity. So we're doing financial stuff, we're getting our market study, we're building our pro forma, we're planning our capital campaign, and we're doing all of our site work, whatever that looks like. And over here under community and capacity, we're doing community outreach and ownership growth. And we're doing governance. Community outreach and ownership growth. I just want to do a quick sidebar here as we're talking about the association work. This is not a presentation on DEI or JEDI, diversity, equity, inclusion, justice work at all, but we have to be thinking about that all along. That's part of everything we do. So here in community outreach and ownership growth, we're thinking, is our team reflective of our community and the folks we want to serve? As a governance, we're thinking of who has a voice in defining what the organization looks like and in making its decisions. So it's in all of this stuff. And so I just wanted to call that out, even though that's not the focus of today. So that's what our working board looks like. And then we have this big transition and we add this general manager and we become a governance board. So now the general manager is overseeing the finances, the site, which becomes site development, becomes our operations. The general manager is overseeing the organizational owner engagement to a large extent. Although there is some coordination with the board, because the board also has a job to do democracy things, which also includes engaging our ownership. So we need to be coordinated there. We're doing team development, which is like our internal processes. Are we working well together? All of that sort of stuff. And then we're overseeing the GM. Are we being a good boss? That delegation and accountability stuff we were talking about. Empowering the GM and then being sure that everything is getting done. Strategic leadership. Now this is another one that goes hand in hand with the GM. We're not doing this by ourselves. So hopefully you can see how the work flows from working to governance. This picture doesn't really tell the whole story though. How do we make that happen? That's the big question, I guess, right now is how. So how to fail. When we hire a GM, how can we guarantee that it won't work? Let's have some fun and let's brainstorm. If we want to make sure when we hire a GM that it doesn't work, what can we do? Put your ideas in the chat. Lack of oversight.
Oops, sorry, Joel.
No, you go, Heather.
All right. Don't ask the GM to report. Lack of communication and expectations. We know how to fail. Wow, it's really coming in. Transition everything to the GM immediately. Too much oversight. Keep them coming. Retain control. These are great. Yeah. Micromanage. If your GM is not in sync with the goals of the co-op, lack of communication, override their decisions, interfere with GM responsibilities for means.
Yeah.
These are good. Insufficient direction. Weak policies. GM is not tapped into the community. Not investing time and energy in building the board GM relationship. Training and communication up front. Don't make the GM accountable. Not enough capital to pay staff well. Ooh, that's a good one. It's not laying the foundation. Lots of common threads in here.
Yeah, this is great. Isn't it funny? We know how to fail. We can call that out really easily and quickly. So most major project holdups come from people problems, not logistical problems. There will be logistical problems, but your best path to an open store is to invest time in doing the people stuff right.
Joel, can I just ask you to repeat that last, like, it's just so huge that I think it bears repeating.
Your best path to an open store, an open, successful, thriving store, is to invest the time in doing the people stuff right.
It's really
Okay.
easy to want to like kind of move through that part quickly because it's not as exciting. So I just really like what you said there. Thanks for indulging me.
Sure. Okay, so how to succeed. So we can, beforehand, we want to prepare. We want to understand what we're going to see. We're going to talk about it. We're going to get ready for it. We're going to practice. And that means two different things. One is we're going to cultivate and carry forward our good practices from earlier stages. And we're going to practice good delegation early and often. We're going to do that from the time we are a new board. As soon as we have a committee or a task force, or hey, these two folks are going to do this thing, we're going to practice good delegation. We're going to learn and develop our governance skills. We're going to invest time in that and not assume it'll somehow happen while we're doing all the other work. And we're going to plan for this transition. We're going to build a transition plan. While it's happening, here's the flip side of what a lot of you are talking about. We're going to communicate well with co-op management. Lots of communication. We're going to empower the co-op management to do this stuff. And then we're going to have accountability. We're going to stay informed and vigilant and able to hold management accountable. Are we achieving the expectations that we thought? And during all of this could go in both columns, obviously, but I needed a fourth bullet for the right column. We're going to be kind. We're going to use kindness through all of this. So let's break this down a little bit. The prepare and practice and develop section. This means doing your job. We're going to build that organizational capacity, build our governance muscles so that we are ready to oversee a GM when the time comes. We're not going to try to, get ready to run a marathon the week before. We're going to start putting in the work ahead of time. Do you run productive meetings? Do you get your agendas out in advance? Do directors show up prepared to work? Do you hold yourselves to high standards of work and conduct? And do we delegate to our committees and other individuals in a way that sets expectations for achievement with clear due dates, clear communication? And then do we hold those delegates to high standards and of work and conduct? So if you are well organized and good at accountability, you'll be well positioned at self-accountability. You'll be well positioned to hold someone else accountable. And this boils down to, do you want to be a do what I say, not what I do kind of board? I don't think so. And cultures are sticky. So if you have a bit of a haphazard culture, that is going to, you are leading the organization. Those things we said early on, we're setting the foundations for the organization. We're leading. If we're haphazard in our board work, that can infiltrate through the rest of the organization, even when it grows. And the kind of board that you are, you will, like will attract like. So if you are haphazard, or if you are failing to hold yourselves accountable, or you're not good at being prepared, that's the kind of people that you will attract to your board. So, so we want to be really good. And sometimes we get into that scarcity mentality and we accept, any hand that goes in the air, any warm body. And what happens is we don't have a high functioning board. We don't set those high standards. And then we come across some people who it's like, oh, they would be perfect for the board. And they come in and they watch one of our board meetings and they're like, waste of my time. So we lay the foundations very early and at every meeting in all of our interactions for what our organization is going to look like. What are the values of our organization?
Joel, this makes me think, ooh, I'm sorry to cut you off there.
No,
that is rude.
Always jump in.
So this makes me think of something else that I've heard you say a bunch before, which is that this also applies to the GM, right? That being a solid board is going to impact the GM almost more than anybody else, because the board is, governs the GM. That's their full-time job. So do they want to go in and work under a messy board? Probably not. So if you want rock solid leadership for your co-op, for the business, so that, when you get to kind of take your hands off the wheels a little bit and start shopping and like doing some of the fun stuff when your store is open, that it's going to be successful enough for you to do that, then being organized in advance so that you get a good and capable person to take over at the helm, those things will all go hand in hand.
Absolutely. Thank you, Heather. And the thing is good GM candidates will have choices. So if you are a board that is super sharp, knows your stuff, GM is going to be like, that is an attractive job. I want to work for that boss. If things are messy, like I said, they've got choices. Look at how many people are on this call. There are lots of co-ops that are going to be looking for quality GMs. So, all righty. So now let's plan for the plan. I might be going too meta here. So governance training, at least 6 months before your GM starts, because we've been doing governance all along anyway. So you're going to want to get the training, get the support you need, so you know how to do it well. Like I said, some governance stuff is counterintuitive. I found some of that out the hard way. You don't have to take the hard way. So it helps to have someone on your board who likes policy work, likes governance work. Like I said, get the support you need. Maybe get a governance buddy. We've got our peer groups. I don't know if you're doing a lot of governance work in those peer groups or talking a lot about governance. It's usually more about the digging our hands in the mud, the market study work and the pro forma and the getting more owners and the owner events and all that sort of stuff.
I know you'll find this very surprising, Joel, but the peer groups mostly pick their own topics, and I rarely can steer them toward governance as a topic.
So it's good to have someone who likes that governance stuff and to keep that flame going. They're not going to be the only one. Everyone needs to be on board for that. So some of that too is when you think about building your bench. We have our group that's in the room right now. Who else is coming? Because this is going to be, this is going to be a long haul. So we're going to need subs to tag in along the way. And then as we go, we're going to reassess our systems and the seats on the bus, who's doing what role as things change over time. Then we're going to do our GM hiring. So that is obviously going to be coordinated with everything, but it's going to be separate. So we're going to have a group that's going to be point for that. We're going to have a hiring committee. And then we're going to have another group, committee, task force, whatever we want to call it, that's going to be in charge of the transition plan. I think having a group that goes out and works on that, that's their job product. We don't necessarily need the whole board putting this together. Yes, and I'm seeing in the chat, Lisa, fantastic, another governance nerd. All righty. So let's talk about the transition plan. That's why we're here. What is it? What does it entail? This is our internal plan for the board and GM that we can build and follow. So it's going to have an onboarding plan. What has to happen once they come in? Who do they need to get to know in the community? All of that. Oh, they need to meet with the architect, design team, all of that. Review the information on the board and the co-op, mission, ends, policies, if you've got them already, hopefully you do. All the stuff that, there's probably a bunch of stuff that was shared during GM hiring. Go back over that. Be sure that now this is really happening, that the review was in depth enough. So one thing that I like to do is once we build a little mini onboarding plan, that can be your first monitoring report. You can do this on a weekly basis. How many steps have we completed from that? And so you can just take a tiny little thing and do our first monitoring report on that. It gets your GM into the habit of reporting on things, doing written reports delivered to the board on written expectations. And so we get to start off small. So our first monitoring report isn't, what's the financial situation? We're opening 3 months later than we thought. We start with, how's the onboard plan going? Have those expectations been met? So I say, start doing that early and often. There's going to be so much happening. It's going to be really tempting to say, you know what, getting that building up or getting the shelves stocked or whatever is going to seem more important than asking our GM for a written report. But absolutely, the written report is part of accountability. It's part of how you do your job that we talked about earlier, where you're acting on behalf of the community and the owners to make good decisions. So I can't emphasize that enough. Start that monitoring early and do it often, especially during this transition period. Financial metrics. Set some financial metrics for pre-opening and opening. And you can start with your own set and then work them over when the GM is there. So what are the sales numbers we're anticipating to hit? What should our labor look like? What's with our cash on hand? And there might be some others as well, but those are going to be the main ones that tell us, ooh, how's it going? So we can get that in a snapshot. So we can get that constant monitoring, so things don't string out and all of a sudden it's like, oh, this has been going on for 2 months. So we can get in there and make corrections when need be. Then outline when the responsibilities are going to transfer. Again, the board starts with all of the responsibility, all of the authority, and then we delegate. Figure out what's going to get handed off at what point. We don't necessarily want to, I think someone called out, how do we fail? Dump it all in the GM right away. So let's figure out what makes sense to step in, and when do we hand off? When do we kind of join arms and let's do this side by side for a little while and then we'll hand it off?
I think, Joel,
yeah.
Ooh, sorry.
Go ahead.
One of the things that I hear that sounds like a benefit of doing that is that then it's also not personal. So if this is decided in advance, then like it's the plan and you're working through the plan, and it's not that, hey, Joel, you came in as GM and I'm not loving what you're doing, so I'm not going to hand this off to you yet, right? There's no risk of emotions getting involved. It's about, hey, here's a plan. We're all going to stick through it. This is how we're going to make these decisions together. And it's about the metrics in these choices we've already made in the past to set our organization up for success, because ultimately that's what it's kind of about.
Right. If we set up these transitions, these handoffs as triggered by these things have happened too, instead of just, oh, 2 weeks after they arrive, we'll hand this off. If we set it up, it's like, well, once this and this and this is in place, then we hand this off. Then again, it makes it less about, it just makes it about functionally what makes the most sense and not personally, how are we doing this? So let's do regular informal check-ins. Typically, this is the board chair. Maybe it's coffee, 10 minutes, maybe it's a half hour. Just being sure that that informal communication thread is going. We're getting to know the person. I would start it, early on, more often, just so we've got that touch point there.
Right, building that relationship so you're your allies in the inevitable fight towards profitability and successful operations.
Right. And then this is another big one, is probably most or all of you have never started a food co-op before. It's possible your GM hasn't. It's probably likely your GM hasn't. So how do we know? What's reasonable? I've never run a grocery store. I've never started a food co-op. I've been in this world for a long time. Ask JQ, or just look at my beard. And so we say, get some help. There are people out there who understand this. They've either gone through it themselves or they've been close enough to it enough times that they know what's going on. And this will help the board determine what amount of failure or non-compliance is acceptable. What's a minor stumble, and what is, we are precariously close to the edge of a cliff. It's good perspective to have. So we don't overreact, and we don't, as some of you said, we don't just go hands off and completely trust and hope that it'll all work out. And then this way you're not going it alone, and you've got that informed perspective that can look at some of your metrics, look at monitoring reports, and then give you guidance on mitigation efforts. Now, the specifics of your transition plan, it's going to be different for every co-op and GM combo, because it's going to depend on what skills do you have on the board and what skills is your GM bringing. Not every GM is going to be a great project manager. You might have a great project manager, so that would look differently. You might have a GM that is great at grocery, but finance is not, they're not, a finance expert. And you might have one on your board. So we're going to look at how do we transition, how do we hand this off? It's going to depend on how quickly the GM is hiring. First of all, your size and who the GM is hiring and when. So all that sort of stuff. So your specifics are going to be different. Of course, this is your baby. No matter how experienced your new nanny is, you want to go over everything clearly. Not that I want to compare GMs to nannies. Okay, maybe it's a horrible analogy, but you get the idea. And remember, your GM is human. They're not perfect. They're going to make mistakes. They're going to see things differently as you. Expect and respect that. Be prepared to help them through it with grace. And don't expect that their experience trumps common sense or the experience of others. So, alrighty, let's dig into some of the keys to success here. As always, clear written expectations and authority and guidelines, clear roles, who, what, when, where, why, how, wherefore, all of that sort of stuff. The board speaking in one voice. And of course, this means when we're communicating to the GM, the board communicates to the GM. However we've defined that, but we're speaking in one voice. When the board is making decisions, we deliberate in many voices. We want those diverse perspectives. We want to kick the tires on our ideas, see what makes sense, what doesn't. It's okay to play devil's advocate when we're doing that sort of stuff. When we're talking to the GM or we're communicating outwardly, we're speaking in one voice. Delegation. We're doing good delegation. I've talked about that a couple times. I'll leave you with just one thing here on delegation. I grew up learning delegation was one thing. It's you're going to do this. I learned over time that it's two things. It's you're going to do this and I'm not. And that second part is really critical here. Some of you folks talked about that and how to make this fail. Hold on to our decisions that we've always made. So we're going to have to let go, because I can't, if I am still doing half the work, I can't hold someone else accountable if it fails. So we have to do that handoff and keep the oversight. Monitoring, that's the oversight piece. I think I've probably talked enough about that monitoring piece. One more time, early and often. Stick to the roadmap, follow it unless you have to change course, and then we renegotiate, we rebuild our plan, hopefully with outside expertise. So do the monitoring, which is part of the road plan. I said I was going to wrap up monitoring, another thing here. Even if the report is lousy and it's hard to find time to do it, do the monitoring report. I would rather get a poorly written report on time early on and say, okay, I got bullet points this time. That's all I got, but I got it on time. This is a good starting point. And again, have that third party expert or experts. There's nothing to say you can't have more than one here. You probably try to have JQ's ears and eyes during some of this, but lots of people like to have JQ's ears and eyes. So, all right, watch out. All right, during transition, keep your eyes on delays. Things are going to change. So I said, follow the roadmap unless you have to change. There might be times where you have to change. Finances. This isn't really related to the transition part, but it happens during the transition time. Keep your eye on finances and be ready to jump in and raise more money if that's what's needed. Someone called out earlier, not having enough capital to pay staff. Well, guess what? If supply chain issues slow things down and you already have your staff and that inflates your budget for construction, and it means, oh, I'm paying more people more money before we open the doors. Well, be ready to make whatever needs to happen financially. GM performance, again, keep an eye out for late reports and be sure you're getting the information you need. Communication, lots of communication. Be sure your GM doesn't disappear. Be sure you don't disappear. Keep that communication flow going. How can the board support the GM? And again, you can have third-party experts help you with this stuff. Bumps and hiccups are to be expected. Careening off the rails, not so good. All right, even if we do everything right, even if we plan really well, what could keep us from being successful? Accountability. If we don't do that piece well, if we're still holding the reins, if we're still trying to be the worker bees, if we don't have a deep enough bench to bring fresh folks onto the board, onto the leadership team, onto our committees, thinking that opening the store is the finish line. It is not. It's kind of the starting line for the real race, because that's when we really get to have the impact on our community. So we want to get there and keep going. Human beings, they will muck up just about everything if you let them. So those are kind of the trip hazards to watch out for. All right, I'm going to do some takeaways here, and then we'll open it up to questions. So be prepared for the transition, create your roadmap for the board and the GM. Do it now. You are always working towards that. You are building your foundations. Whatever you're doing now is helping you for your transition later. Having a good board culture and habits, whatever stage you're at, communicating clearly, holding yourselves and others accountable. Governance. For some folks, like me and Lisa, love it. It's super fun and exciting. For others, it's not as exciting as building a building or hiring a GM. So we need to be aware. What's the board? What's the governance transition look like for the board? Does it mean that once we kind of get to that working to governance transition, that some folks who loved being on the board and were great being on the board for the working phase, maybe that's the appropriate time for them to cycle off and get some fresh folks on. So for those folks who think that governance is not as exciting as building a building or hiring a GM, your internal systems and your choices and your planning and your training are definitely as important as building and hiring a GM. So don't wing it, get help. Yeah, I think we can open up to questions now. So there we go. I think I can probably stop sharing screen.
All right, Cheryl asked and JQ answered, are there training or best practices for hiring a GM? And JQ said, yes, entire sessions and tools. So that's great because it's an important one.
It's an important one, but it's a whole separate day-long, week-long topic. So yes, those tools are out there. Email me or come to Up and Coming. We'll be having sessions on it.
All right. What other questions do you have about any of this? You know, going back to the beginning, through the process, anything? What you got?
Can I ask one since no one's unmuted?
Please.
Yes.
So a quick one, and then I see Lisa did ask. Us governance geeks were asking. Joel, how would you recommend, like you said, like don't wait, don't do all that, start doing all this governance stuff later. How would a working board how would they integrate this early into their process? You said, monitor, but how early would you write the policies? Like what advice could you give to those who are in earlier stages on how to start to integrate this?
Yeah, it's a tough one because the policies for a mature operating open co-op are way too onerous for a small working group in stage one. But what we can do is we can do self-reflection. How are things going? What's working well? What isn't? So very early on, we can say, well, what's working well? Well, this, great. Let's write that down as an expectation that we keep doing this then. What's not working well? This, okay, let's say, how could we solve that? And then write our solution down as an agreement. And so we start to build those agreements. And then what we could do is we can check in on our written agreements every couple of months, say, how are we doing with these? So that's a very informal way to start that. And that checking in can be our reporting, how we first learned to do that. I think one of the best ways to start to practice this, and this goes right to Lisa's question as well, is once we start delegating, if you have a really clear committee charter that says this is who's on this committee, this is what they're charged to do, this is when they're supposed to do it, this is how they're going to report back. Boom, we've got clearly written expectations, and then we can get a written report from that group, and that is our monitoring, and we can see, did we do this? So that's how we start stacking these good delegation, good monitoring, good governance habits. So, and I see there's a bunch more questions flying through here. So yes, Lisa, on delegation, practice, like I just said, it's the best way of doing it.
There's a question here about, I equate a GM with multi-million-dollar companies. Most grocery co-ops are small scale. Why would you need a GM? Could not the board act as GM? And then JQ answered down here and said, in short, no. From decades of experience in the food co-op industry, the board cannot function as a GM and keep a successful co-op open. The very rare exceptions have been very small startups in rural communities. Has been a temporary necessity, but they've moved back to having a GM role as soon as possible. So that GM role is really an operational role where the GM is like in the weeds, boots on the ground, doing the work, running the store. So whereas, a GM in a multi-million-dollar, a big corporation might be kind of doing more of that blue sky work and that big picture thinking and delegation. The GM of a startup is very much the store manager. So
right, and you also have to remember that your board only has authority as a decision-making body. And if you're doing 4 hours of meetings every month, you're working less as a decision-making body than your GM is in a week. You're doing less in a year than your GM is in a week. So your organization is not going to be agile, leaving decisions at the board level. So that applies to whether you hire a GM or not. We want to be agile. We want to be able to do that. So are there resources for, oh, go ahead, Heather, you were going to.
Oh, no, you're halfway in. Do it.
Yeah, resources for setting relationships with vendors. Can or should the board and GM do this together? JQ, do you have thoughts on that?
Sure. Yes. So what we encourage folks to do is to get information as much as you can on all potential vendors, especially the local ones. Create spreadsheets, information, contact points, what their terms are, what they carry. But no, that should be handed over to the GM to set the expectations, those relationships. There are very important cash flow issues, grocery business issues about how the terms are set up with the actual vendor, and those should not be done without the GM at the table. This is a place for the board to let go. This is not a place you will have more expertise than your GM, or if you do, you have a different problem.
That's great. Okie doke. So let's see, what are the benchmarks that when hit should trigger further delegation? Can you give some examples? Ooh, good ones. Good one.
Well, if you've ever been in a meeting and a small group of people are really passionate about something and they're talking about it, and they're going to take care of it, and everyone else in the meeting goes, could you take that offline? That's a good indication that that's something that can be delegated from the larger group, because we want to protect our board time and not do all of the work during board time. If we can delegate it, if it makes sense to have a smaller task force tackle something, that's one way. That's a clue there.
Does this question apply in part to delegation to the GM? Like as you're making that split between working and governance, so we start here, and then how do we know what those, what might those benchmarks be to say, okay, here's some more?
That's going to, again, I think it's going to be so specific to the board that you have and the GM that you hire
and the project that you're in.
Yeah.
Right. So, because sometimes you hire a GM and you're, at the very beginning of building. Sometimes you hire a GM and your space is built out, right? So it's going to kind of depend on, like Joel said, who that person is, what the tasks are in front of them, and where their expertise is in part as well. And potentially also that person's level of familiarity with your organization and your community, because you want to make sure that they have that strong foundation and they're starting with that. So those are some other things that I would think of as possible factors there.
Great.
I wanted to go back because Rusty put something in the chat. If everyone's not pouring over the chat like I am, Rusty put something in and said, can't emphasize do it enough to do it now. Food Shed is going through this now, even though the policy register was written 2 years ago. We didn't see the impact of what those policies meant until now when we're facing them directly. So just sort of like a real life shout out there. So thanks for sharing that experience, Rusty.
Thank you. And I saw Isabel put in that they're getting feedback from their GM for reviewing the handbook manual and reworking the board. So
yeah, is there a question on that, Isabel, that you wanted to hit? Or just affirming, like, yeah, do the work. Okay, affirming. Cool. Great. Thanks. Yeah.
Awesome.
Other questions on this?
We've got time for one more.
All right.
If there's one.
It could be yours.
I would say for me,
if there's, go ahead, JQ.
Well, my last question would be, Could you guys put your contact info in the chat if anybody realizes they need professional support in this area and want to talk more?
Oh yeah.
That would be useful. And any wrap-up thoughts you want to share, Joel?
I'll put our stuff in, Joel.
Yeah, I think I made the points over and over. We can share our slide deck. If you want to reach out to us, we can share the slide deck. The slide deck was not meant to be a standalone. A lot of it is just short, pithy bullet points, but we will have the recording soon. And just thank you for coming. Thank you for being on your board. Thank you for changing your community. I do this work because it inspires me, and you all are doing the real boots on the ground hard work. So thanks for inviting us in. Thanks for listening. Thanks for participating and playing. Thanks, JQ.
Absolutely. Well, thank you, everyone. Let's take a minute and thank Joel and Heather for being here. They are donating their time and their expertise, so we appreciate it. Thanks so much for being part of this series. I do want to make sure you know there are still 5 more sessions left, 1 tonight and 2 each day, Wednesday and Thursday. So I hope you'll join us for some of the rest of it. I'm also going to quickly put in a plug. This is on FCI's website, FCI Initiative. There is the Startup Leadership Transition Handbook. I'm only putting this on here because if you're further along, if you're in stage 2, stage 2B, stage 3, and you're like, oh my God, I need a bigger picture before I even talk to an expert, the workbook lays out a little bit more, all echoing what Joel said about the board jam transition. So you can also find that on FCI's website. All right, thank you everyone for a terrific session. I'm gonna go ahead and stop our recording. Joel, if anyone has any last thoughts, questions, they wanna continue to talk, are you guys good sticking around for a few minutes?